So has BYU finally turned the corner on wokeness on campus? I've got a BYU student I interview here, Cade Alvey, who says that it has turned, that the new policies and procedures that BYU has put into place the last couple of years has made a difference. But before we get to the interview, make sure that you hit subscribe, hit the bell, and check out our new Substack, Alive and Intelligent. That's at aliveandintelligent.substack.com. In-depth articles from great writers and authors. And in Cwic Media style, no fluff. These are bold, practical, and relevant articles. You can click the link in the description box as well. And finally, this episode is brought to you by Going to Travel and our Wavemakers podcast cruise down the Mexican Baja. This is going to be an absolute blast. Top YouTube personalities and podcasters will come together. People from that online community will come together in person, and we're just going to have a great time. This is on November 15th through the 22nd. Go to cwicmedia.com, scroll up to the top to trips and events, and go down to Wavemakers Podcast Cruise. Here's the interview. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring on BYU student Cade Alvey. Cade, how are you doing?
Doing fantastic. Stoked to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, welcome. Right to it in this question. Is BYU conquering its wokeness?
That is an excellent question. And so the reason I suspect I'm being asked this question is because I just transferred to BYU from UVU. So I've done 2 semesters at BYU now. And I mean, like I've seen a lot of reports and I've seen them for a long time that maybe made me a little bit nervous, like that Keep the Faith at BYU group that was picking up a bunch of steam. And so I was a little bit weary when I went into BYU, and I don't know if I can say much about I can't make like a meta analysis of what's going on at the university, but I can say that just from an individual student level, it was everything I could have asked for an educational experience. My professors were honest and they were fair. A couple of them in confidence revealed their political views to me, and you would have never guessed that based on their instruction. Their instruction represented both sides of the debates that we were having extremely fairly and extremely well. And the family proclamation was upheld in many of my classes, and the gospel principles were brought in to sort of to support and to kind of supplement a secular education. And so, and the question the question you asked is a lot more direct than what I'm able to provide as like an on the ground student, but I think it is a remarkably fair and politically diverse campus. And I've been just astounded at how well they're implementing everything.
So, one thing you said there in terms of, teaching the proclamation, that's something that I think has always been there to some degree, but it weakened for quite a while. And I think people were afraid to bring it up. It is still, even in church, right? It's a lightning rod sometimes to bring that up, because there is a spectrum of where people stand with that and how they interpret it. And it brings up some controversial issues. And so that's really good to hear. I think that's an important thing. And I do know that one of the changes that was made there at BYU, in fact, they really enforced it fully, I think this year, the beginning of this year, was in their hiring practices and annual interviewing process is a litmus test. And I've been saying that for years. You've got to make the family proclamation a litmus test, because that's going to usually, it's going to weed out those that are going to be supporting ideologies that are contrary to the gospel. So that's a great thing. Now, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the context in which that happened, so I'm a philosophy student. I probably should have mentioned that. So, I mean, usually our department is far worse than any others when it comes to secularizing. So in my philosophy class, my professor, for safety, I won't reveal his name or anything like that, but he was a wonderful lecturer, absolutely fantastic. And he was another one of those guys you never knew what his view was, whether he was describing free will versus determinism. He would describe it extremely well, and you would never know if he believes this or not because he's so well at describing and explaining even views that he disagrees with. And in the last few units, we were discussing like John Stuart Mill and Marx, and we were reading in Marx, and he talked about how Marx was very uninterested in having a Mother's Day. He said that you shouldn't have a Mother's Day, you should have like a Parents' Day to kind of remove the bounds of the family in order to kind of make everyone more communal. Obviously, that was his goal. And for the first time in the whole class, he said, like, and this is probably going to be really, really interesting to some people, because if you believe in the family proclamation, which I do, this is going to bother you, and it bothers me. And I thought that was really cool to see him step up against that and give his unfiltered take. And he did a number of things that I just was blown away by, like we started studying Soren Kierkegaard, who's this existential philosopher. Got some very interesting takes on religion and ethics.
A lot of Christians love him.
Yeah, a lot of Christians love him, which kind of surprises me because he's very he's very not Christian sometimes. But so before we started talking about that, he did a reading assignment that he called inoculation. And before the philosophy of religion unit, he didn't assign a text. He didn't assign an old book or anything like that. He assigned 2 general conference talks about philosophies that we should that the prophets and apostles have warned us to stay away from and to be.
That is so wonderful to hear. What were the talks? What do you remember?
Oh,
or do you remember what they were about?
I can probably pull them up and send them to you so you can put them in the description. But one was from Dallin H. Oakes, and he talks about avoiding moral relativism and like nihilism, kind of saying that there's like no purpose to life, and saying that there is no absolute moral truths. So, and those are the 2 that I can remember off the top of my head. But one of the other talks was also fantastic, just about avoiding the certain philosophies, and obviously everything else was fair game. Like we talked about atheism, we talked about materialism, like the view that there's only material things, would like things that are controversial as a Latter-day Saint, like that, like you're talking about atheism in the BYU church school, and he did it fairly and he did it well, and and he should, and he did an excellent job. And then when it came to Marx and the family, and when it came to the philosophy of religion unit, he stepped up and he assigned us excellent reading materials and excellent inoculations, as it were, and he gave his unadulterated opinion. And I shouldn't say that it was just when the family, obviously he'd step in and give his issues with the arguments for atheism or whatever, just as he would the arguments for theism. But it was awesome. So awesome.
Yeah, that's great education. You know, when I a couple of years back, when things did get, especially during COVID, when things did kind of looked kind of grim with some, especially the humanities departments. I used to get some feedback from BYU professors that were a little more on the radical side, and it would be, and some of them I met personally and went to lunch with them right up in Provo. But they would say, look, you don't believe in an education. You think they should also, the kids should always be sheltered. The college kids should always be sheltered. And you don't want to open up these other ideas. I'm like, no, I don't care about that. That's not the point. I do think you need to talk about the philosophies. I do think you need to talk about atheism. I do think that in an interfaith class, you go out and you talk about the other religions and what they believe and show the positives of all of these things. That is and thinking of the term in its classical sense, that is a liberal education that opens things up and gives you a view of things. But then you need a professor that is guided by faithfulness and doesn't have an alternative agenda to put. It's kind of like this, you'd go through a philosophy class and you have a professor that all of a sudden would say, okay, now we know we're talking about Marx. Let me tell you about Marx. This is my favorite. And this is what I believe in. And this is what I believe all of you should be doing. Right. And what you'd get is that in other classes, that type of a thing. I'm using it as a sort of metaphor for other classes, especially in the humanities. And that's what you would get with these professors, where they would take a stance oftentimes against the family proclamation, oftentimes against principles of the gospel, and start leading students down a different path. But you haven't experienced any of that.
Not at all. Like I cannot explain how awesome it's been. And I came from UVU. So like I was almost done with my degree at UVU, and I made the controversial choice to switch over to BYU, which we can probably talk about. If you're interested, we can talk about why I did that. But UVU, I would never complain about my education at UVU. It was absolutely fantastic. On my mission, I went to West Texas, and my eyes were open to what Protestantism was like. And then I got home and I started studying philosophy at UVU, and I was one of 2 theists in the whole entire department that I was aware of. And the other one wasn't even religious.
Yeah.
So
that's not surprising.
I was exposed to
even in Orem, Provo, that's not surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. So is that what is that what triggered you to kind of make the move?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. And I'm so grateful that I was able to really understand secularism and atheism and people who lose faith. A lot of them were former members of the church. So I was really exposed to another side of things that I'm able to understand and appreciate in a way that I wasn't. But Elder Holland gives this devotional where he talks about BYU as a school being the fulfillment of a prophecy. And he talks about this instance where they were just a struggling college, and they're deciding on if they should sell off portions of the land that they own in order to sort of make ends meet and pay the bills. And I can't remember. I'm trying to remember who it was. His name is escaping me now. But one of the early leaders of BYU stands up and he shares this visionary experience he has where he looks into the future almost as the sun is rising over the Salt Lake Valley, and he can see a beautiful university up on the hill where people are walking into hundreds of buildings when at the time they just had 2 buildings or something. And he said they knew they were students because they were carrying books in their hands. And when I was in my philosophy degree, I'm really interested in philosophy of religion and ethics and epistemology. And there's this club at BYU, the BYU Faith and Reason Club that they had just founded. And they asked me to go give a presentation at this club on ethics and the restored gospel, like how we should view ethics and how that plays into apologetics, and how a lot of our critics are how they have some contradictory views on ethics, especially when they're critiquing the church from an ethical point of view. But it's beside the point, because when I was going up to this presentation, I just kind of saw myself in the place of those students that were walking up the hill in Elder Holland's talk. And I just could not get out of my mind the thought of going to BYU and being able to openly and freely express my religious views and not having to be stealthy about it. And so I applied, got in. My wife goes there, so it also makes things a little bit easier. But the experience has just been absolutely fantastic. Like in my first economics class, I got in there, and the professor, like day 1, said that like taxes were bad because, like, if you want to maximize the amount of wealth in the nation, taxes decrease the amount of wealth. And I was like looking over my shoulder, like, you guys hear that? You just said taxes are bad. That is crazy. That is bonkers. That's not allowed. He shouldn't be able to say that. And all my classes were just absolutely fantastic.
So what you're saying is based on your experience, and I know that the same thing. I've talked to a lot of ASU students here and that have gone through philosophy classes, and is that you feel it's almost like there is a sense of kind of a cancel culture there, where if you speak up too much about religious views and use that as your own context for the philosophies that are being taught in class, that is kind of a no-no, and you shouldn't bring that up. You might be ridiculed. You might be, the professor might specifically give a retort that is unpleasant for you and make you look bad. And but yet you go to BYU or a religious school, and yet they're going to talk about atheism. They're going to talk about all the philosophers. They're going to talk about what they actually think. And most of them are not religious, and open that up so that you've got a viewpoint of both. Correct?
Yeah, and so at UVU, at least, it was just a little bit different. I wouldn't say it was like a cancel culture, but it was like I would get very serious pushback for religious opinions. And not that it was like they were attempting to silence my opinion or anything like that, which I don't know necessarily what what we're defining as cancel culture here. Sorry to have a typical philosopher's answer, but I would get very serious pushback, and I'm super grateful for it because it made me a lot more able to defend my own views and to make a lot more sense of my own views. But I definitely was in the minority, and I was in the minority in sharing opinions in class, and my professors would push back on it, and other students would push back on it, and in private conversations after and before class, my classmates would push back on it. So absolutely, I feel like it's been a much more balanced education at BYU. Not to say that UVU wasn't great or anything like that, but the experience at BYU is just unmatched. It's been amazing.
How do you see your experience in education and philosophy there helping you in your testimony? Because that's usually not the case, and preparing you for the future.
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say that my study in philosophy has given me the tools to navigate difficult questions within my faith. Whereas before, I feel like I was kind of adrift almost. And just being well-versed in philosophy and how people have handled life's biggest questions, and just seeing examples of that over and over and over, and being able to contextualize these seemingly minor questions that I have in my own faith journey with the biggest questions of all time, it's really enlightening. And in one of my classes, it was first day, and he put up that D&C scripture where he says, where it says, seek ye wisdom from the best books. And he pulled up our reading list, which was like Descartes and like just all the greats from the early modern period. And he said, these are the best books. We are seeking wisdom from the best books. So
interesting.
We are listening to prophetic counsel when we study how these great thinkers and great men were able to navigate these questions. And I resemble that entirely in my own view. I feel like reading and understanding logical reasoning and these amazing men that were writing and thinking for centuries about stuff that we're only still now just figuring out. It's inspiring, and it gives you the tools to navigate problems in your own faith walk.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And again, that's the idea of education, the way it should be, without taking an agenda, because you can take negative thinkings from Descartes, you can go through Hegel and Kant and all the way back, Rousseau, all the way back, and you're going to see a lot of bad stuff, especially through the continental area. But it's still important to learn it. And
oh, yeah.
We live in an age today, Cade, I think, where I think that Latter-day Saints have been put into a culture where we we become very myopic, and this is our religion. Everybody else and every other idea is outside of us. And so this is just all we have right here. And if anything comes in, that's really bad. Where the opposite, I think, is true. And I think that what we need to do, instead of looking at everything as a threat, is understand it with a faithful eye, right? And so we take in the education, we learn about it. We actually can help others that way that may absorb some negative philosophies and some nihilism, and help them in that regard, and be able to articulate things, because your information that you're learning that is positive in your philosophy classes and from your professors is of no value. Or it's of a lot less value if you don't have the context of the things that are negative or different in their approaches to certain questions, because you can't articulate it as well, right? You've got to have what's inside and what is good and righteous and true, and you have to understand what is outside that circle also.
Oh yeah, and that's why, I mean, I'm so grateful for Latter-day Saint content creators like yourself, and that's part of the reason why Baylor and I, with all those in favor, are doing what we're doing, is because for a long time I would go to my philosophy classes and scarcely hear every time I heard a philosophical idea, I would kind of have to create my own scaffolding for how it meshes with my faith, and kind of see where it plays well and where it doesn't play well. And the only place where I would be able to learn about any of these ideas, like the rejection of the family, for example, is on Cwic Media or on Jacob Hansen's channel or something like that. So just if there is anyone listening that is kind of like me, maybe they're going to a more secular school or in a more secular department, just know, like, all those in favor, we're here. Greg Madsen's doing his thing. There's people out there that are talking about these important issues, and they're doing it in order to educate, but with, like you said, the lens of faith. I think that's a great way to put it.
So let me back up. Let's talk about this a little bit. You've got a YouTube channel that's called All Those in Favor. I've seen several of the episodes. They're very good, very well done, both the commentary and the interviews. What inspired you to start the channel, and how long ago did you start it?
So we started 6 months ago, and I think it was a culmination of things that kind of led us to actually get it done. But Baylor and I were really annoyed with the public perception of the church online. And we both had these experiences where, like, growing up in high school, we had these intellectual questions about our faith, and we just didn't really have the resources to answer them. And like, people like Fair were existent, and Interpreter, and they do amazing work, but it just didn't reach us. Like, it doesn't reach the younger generation, doesn't reach the high school age kids. And so a big reason that we started our channel is because we want to make public and accessible the best possible reasons for faith, and to do so in a way that every audience and every age group can understand, and just it can reach them. So that's like our mission statement. So we had a video blow up really early on. It was like our first video. It started growing really fast, and we didn't expect to have to deal with anything that quick. And we were like, okay, we got to go figure out what we're actually doing here before we keep going forward. And we went to a little sports bar by my house, and we wrote down on our document, make public and accessible the best possible reasons for faith. So that's our goal. That's all of our motives summed up in one statement.
So do you think, give me an idea of how, do you have negative comments, people that are against the church that come in and comment on your videos?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you handle that?
We're still trying to figure that out, what our best method of going about things is, because we're still responding to quite a few of them, and we try and do it in a way that's cordial and respectful, without letting it ruin our lives, because there's just so many of them. But our goal is really to just not allow, like, uncontested slam dunks. Like, we don't want individuals to come along and leave something in our comment section that someone who's maybe struggling with their faith just scrolls along in the comment section and finds and is troubled by it. That's the last thing we want. So, and hopefully we'll get to the point where we have a content library that addresses criticism, so we don't have to be dialoguing as much in negative comments. But the negative comments are absolutely there. And if you make any, like, no matter who you are, if you make content about the church, you're going to see negative comments that come your way. It's just part of the game.
So for you feel responsible for the comment section?
I almost do, in a way. I don't feel I don't feel responsible for what ends up in my comment section, but I do feel responsible to get a faithful perspective out on certain comments that may be troubling to people who come across them.
Okay. I'm still trying to figure it out after 7-8 years here. I am by nature a fighter. So I want to go in sometimes and just go at it. I've done it too many times. Usually what happens is my wife reads all of my comments and all the comments on every video. I don't have the time. She'll go through and she'll read everything. And then she'll be the one that comes back and said, you have to delete that. You have to take that out, or you have to change that. So I've got kind of someone checking me a little bit when I say things that I shouldn't. And so that's a big help for me. But usually it just depends on what it is. Sometimes I don't have the time to engage online in a comment section where I'm going to end up with 20 comments back and forth trying to explain that, Joseph Smith is not a pedophile or something like that. It's just, exactly. That's very difficult for me to manage. And what do? Do I just leave it? Do I challenge it strongly to begin with? There's a lot of things there because usually, at least at the point of my platform, those are people with an agenda that are typically not questioning something, even though they might start that way. They're they've got an agenda to try and get as much of their negative content in the comment section as possible.
Yeah.
So it's still tough.
And it's
so
unfortunate.
I'm
and yeah, it's an ongoing battle, and it's hard to figure out. We have had some success reaching out to people privately. If someone is kind of having a heyday in our comment section, we'll say, hey, send us a DM and let's chat. And usually they're a lot more, when there's no public audience, they're a lot nicer. And we've had some great conversation with people. Sent out a couple Book of Mormons, copies of the Book of Mormon. I don't know how you say a plural Book of Mormon, but the
Books of Mormon.
That's been a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So what has your favorite episode been so far?
Oh, that's a great question. I really, our interview with Carrie Muhlestein was fantastic. It was so much fun. And then we did a video responding to an Orthodox priest, which was fun because I love the abstract theological issues. Like we can sit there and talk about Book of Mormon translation. My brains will be bored off. But if we're talking about like theology, God's foreknowledge, anything that's a lot more abstract and most people don't care about, that's my niche. But I'd say probably my favorite episode so far is one that we haven't released yet. We just did an interview with one of the leading cult scholars of the world. He studies new religious movements. And I had a conversation with him this week that we're going to be posting hopefully this weekend. And he goes into the empirical literature on what something means, or what does it mean to be a cult. And he also goes into brainwashing, and he's very, very antagonistic to both concepts. He says the word cult is basically it just throws people off these days. It doesn't mean anything anymore. We use the word new religious movement. So anyone saying cult is probably just digging up old 70s and 80s psychological jargon that has been discredited for years. And brainwashing is a topic that he was also very passionate on. He said that certainly doesn't exist. That just was picked up by evangelicals in the 70s. So I'm really excited for people to hear that episode because that's one of the most common comments we get. Is
it a Latter-day Saint guest?
No, he's not a Latter-day Saint. He is
that's better.
He is not a religious person, and he's an excellent scholar. So it was an awesome interview. I'm really excited.
That's great. Well, where do people find you then? Is there anywhere else? You guys have a website or anything else?
We have an Instagram and we have a Facebook. Okay. So people can go follow us there. We're working on getting a TikTok, and even though I hate TikTok, so we'll be hopefully doing a website and all the rest of the platforms. But right now it's just Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And our Instagram has picked up the most traction. YouTube's also doing well. But we're happy to have anyone wherever they're willing to follow us. So
very cool. So on YouTube, it's All Those in Favor. We'll put a link in the description box so that people can go over and catch your new episode coming out soon on cults, which I would be fascinated with. So I'll be sure to watch that. But anyway, Cade, really appreciate your time. Great stuff. I wish you all the luck in the world there at BYU, and maybe down the road here, we'll get you back on the show.
Perfect. I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me on. Cwic is a legendary outlet, and I'm super grateful for it. So thank you.